Since 1949, China's progress has amazed the onlookers. When it comes to countries, it's a proper overnight rags to riches story. After World War II, many countries like Japan, Germany, and UK had to rebuild themselves, but China is unique because it built itself from the ground up. If you look at the US, it took them approximately 125 years to become the economic juggernaut they are today, and the British took more than 500 years to become an imperial global power. China, on the other hand, took less than 50 years to become the heavyweight in global politics. By 1971, China had secured a permanent seat in the United Nations against the odds set by the US and even without the support of the Soviet Union. Today, China's economy is one of the largest in the world, while also being the fastest growing. The factory to the world that ranks so poorly in democracy, transparency, and human rights has spread its influence so wide that it rivals that of the current superpower. China is all set to surpass the United States as the world's largest economy in the next decade, according to Citigroup. Now, China's ambitions don't stop at growing its economy. The technological, military, ideological, and diplomatic fronts are also being fought by China. Taking the US President Bill Clinton's remarks as a challenge, China has successfully implemented internet censorship inside of its borders and controlled the flow of information to its heart's content. The Chinese technological progress can be measured by the uneasy relations with the US and their whack-a-mole game to suppress the Chinese tech companies since the Trump administration. Militarily, China supports one of the largest and highest funded forces, which theoretically has an answer to every American weapon, equipment, soldier, doctrine, and strategy. The veteran military aircraft industry of the United States took around 2.5 decades to deploy the fifth-generation fighters to the front lines, only to be countered by the nascent Chinese industry that provided their soldiers with similar type of aircraft in seemingly no time. It is no secret that Beijing is trying to become the next superpower, replacing Washington with its plans and preparations set in motion with little to no significant hurdles keeping them from achieving their goals. However, China's problem might not be taking over the baton of the power as much as holding on to it. You see, being a superpower means a lot of things. In addition to economy, military, and technology, your country needs to create and follow a sustainable plan of action to maintain the world order. The emergence of service and technology-based economies has incentivized the countries to become more and more self-reliant. China's major economic power comes from its manufacturing sector, which will fall more and more out of place in the future paradigm. The military of the Dragon Nation might be mighty, but the keyword here is might. It's untested for almost half a century, and the eye-opening reports of corruption, especially in the military, that managed to slip through the cracks of the government censorship doesn't paint a fearsome picture as intended by Beijing. Although becoming increasingly self-reliant, China doesn't exactly possess the technological edge it needs. The embargoes placed by the West on Chinese tech companies were indeed a heavy blow to the Jade Empire, and basically took them back to the drawing board. A large population, which was mostly made up of peasants and farmers, have upgraded to middle and higher middle class. They are more educated and more aware. And this poses a threat to the ruling party, the CCP, which will have to focus its attention on the domestic issues, leaving it with very little resources to apply on the diplomatic front. All said and done, a superpower needs to hold three pillars on which their empire stands. These are land, population, and isolation. You need land to accommodate your population, and mining and farming it for resources is the critical means for sustaining your society by providing food, shelter, clothing, and of course, jobs. All the largest empires in history are measured by the span of land they had control over, and still, it is one of the leading causes of war. England became Great Britain when it took control of the Scottish Highlands, and the Great Britain became the empire only when its holdings got so expansive that the sun never set on it. Now, land is not a major problem facing China, as it has plenty of it inside of its borders, as well as have access to a lot of countries under its influence. After land, you need to strike a perfect balance of population, not too much that you cannot sustain them, but also not too less that you don't have people manning your factories, offices, and government posts, or even the military to defend yourself from any external aggression. Now, China boasts the second largest population in the world, so it has plenty of people, but not for long. The decades-long population control measures like the one-child policy has proven too effective for its own good. In addition to a significant gender disparity, this population is aging quickly, and the growth rate is not enough to replace the retirees and keep the place running. As discussed before, a large population is now middle and higher middle class. China is also called home to the second highest number of billionaires in a country just behind US only by a small margin. This uplift has left less and less people who are willing to work low-level, low-paying jobs that create the bulk of job opportunities available in the country. Lastly, isolation. The superpower, while powerful enough to project its force in any corner of this large, round Earth, needs to have barriers for any threat that comes its way. And there's no barrier better than space. Not only does it give you time to prepare defenses against the enemy approaching your borders, but also renders the enemy too exhausted to fight you when it finally reaches. USA, for example, is protected by the Pacific and the Atlantic on its sides. The invading nation needs to incur an incredible expense to raise an army and a fleet that can not only brave the Great Ponds but also fight the defenses when they reach. The colossal undertaking is the number one deterrent for any attack against US. One of the reasons for the fall of Soviet Union was its close proximity to the European Union, the advantage they didn't have but the US did. And guess who won in the end? Before US, Britain was the superpower. Its isolation from the rest of the mainland Europe during the Age of Sail meant that UK could sail around the world and establish colonies in relative peace, while its rivals in the continent were constantly fighting among themselves, depleting the resources they desperately needed to establish and maintain colonies of their own. Let's go back in time a little further. It's Islamic Golden Age. Any of this era's empires had its center of gravity in or around the Arabian Peninsula, protected by the vast formidable deserts that show no mercy to the noobs coming from far away, or the tall barren mountains of the Persian lands that themselves were an uphill battle to conquer, pun intended. The Islamic Golden Age stayed golden when its power centers stayed in Arabia, turning the dials on our time machines even more, and we find ourselves in an era when Rome ruled supreme. Why? Because there was no power significant enough nearby to challenge its hegemony. Egypt is past its prime, and the Persian Empire has effectively let go of its ambitions. The only army that can present a real challenge to the Roman legions is in China, which, at this point in time and technology, is effectively impossible. All these empires stayed empires until they maintained this isolation, and the moment this isolation was taken out of equation, so were the superpowers themselves. So when it comes to China and its rise, this isolation issue might prove difficult to overcome. China to its north faces Russia, a major military power, not only in the region but on the global stage. To the east is Japan, with its legendary military doctrine on top of the US presence in the country, acting as its force multiplier. To its south is its main problem, India. India has ambitions of its own. It has the largest population, a large amount of land, good diplomatic relations with the global community, and the same problem with the elusive isolation. The countries have faced off each other a couple of times before on a land dispute, which might still prove a catalyst for a war in the future. China has hope in its neighbor Pakistan, but this country is too unpredictable for China to base its strategy on. Beijing has yet not disclosed what, if it has any plan, to create a favorable isolation for itself. And we hope it's not something Fallout-esque where they nuke their surroundings and create a nuclear wasteland uninhabitable and unsurpassable for humans just to become and stay a superpower. With initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative and the String of Pearls, China has guaranteed itself its rise to the superpower status. But that is only half the battle. Will China be able to hold on to its throne? What do you think?